The world runs on money. But money doesn't move on its own. It flows where power directs it. It accumulates where influence commands it. And it disappears where control is lacking. We're taught that the global economy is a decentralized system, impersonal, impartial, and governed by free markets. That no one is really in charge. But behind the charts and numbers lies a very different reality. Who sets the rules of trade? Who decides which countries get loans and which drown in debt? Who determines what industries rise and which workers fall behind? These questions lead us to the true architecture of power in the 21st century. An architecture hidden in plain sight, beneath the logos, beyond the headlines, and behind the so-called invisible hand. This is not a story about economics. It's a story about control, how it's seized, how it's hidden, and how it's justified. For decades, we've been sold the idea that markets govern themselves. That competition guarantees fairness. That globalization means equal opportunity. But in the real world, influence is hoarded, not shared. Decisions that affect billions are made in boardrooms, not ballot boxes. And the global economy is less a democracy than a cartel. A cartel of multinational corporations, financial institutions, central banks, and geopolitical alliances, operating with little transparency and even less accountability. These entities aren't conspiracies in the shadows. They are institutions in the spotlight. But their real power lies in what we're not taught to question. In school, we learn about supply and demand, about GDP, inflation, and fiscal policy. But we don't learn who profits from inflation, who manipulates policy, who actually controls supply chains, debt markets, currencies, and labor flows. Take central banks, for example. We're told they're independent, apolitical. But their decisions to raise or lower interest rates can trigger recessions, bankrupt nations, or inflate asset bubbles that enrich the few. Or the International Monetary Fund, the so-called doctor for struggling economies. But its prescriptions often read like instructions for dismantling public institutions: cut spending, privatize services, open markets to foreign investors. Or trade agreements. Framed as tools for cooperation, they're often blueprints for deregulation, written with corporate lobbyists at the table and the public locked outside. Or multinational tech companies, platforms that harvest data, shape behavior, influence elections, and operate above national laws. Together, these players form what can only be described as a new economic aristocracy, one that transcends nations and operates in the service of wealth, not citizens. But if this power is real, how is it maintained? And more importantly, how is it hidden? Language plays a role. Terms like market forces, economic efficiency, and global competitiveness disguise the fact that decisions are made by people, with names, titles, interests, and ideologies. Complexity is another tool. The more abstract the system, the harder it is to challenge. Debt becomes leverage. Derivatives become innovation. Austerity becomes discipline. Media plays its part, too. Outlets report economic news like weather, as if markets just happen, rather than being driven by deliberate policy and calculated influence. And then there's ideology. The belief that wealth is deserved, that poverty is natural, and that markets, left alone, will create justice. But these beliefs don't reflect reality. They serve power. And that power is not theoretical, it's structural. It lives in institutions that span borders, and in the networks of individuals who run them. So the question isn't just who runs the global economy? It's who is allowed to? Who writes the rules? Who is above the law? Who bears the consequences when things fall apart? Because the truth is, we're not living in a free market. We're living in a system of organized influence, disguised as freedom, built on silence, and upheld by myth. And until we name that system, we can't begin to change it. This film is an investigation. A map. A mirror. It follows the money, traces the decisions, and exposes the architecture of global economic power. Because before we can reclaim the future, we need to understand who really runs the present. To understand who runs the global economy, we must dissect its components: money creation, capital flow, debt management, labor control, and political influence. At the center of each, we find overlapping actors wielding concentrated power. Start with central banks. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England. These institutions don't just steer monetary policy, they set the tone for global financial behavior. Their rate decisions ripple across continents, affecting mortgages in Kansas, food prices in Cairo, and wages in Dhaka. Unlike democratically elected governments, central banks operate with engineered independence. But who are they accountable to? Their boards are often stacked with financial insiders. Their tools, quantitative easing, interest rates, liquidity operations, are understood by few, debated by fewer. Then there's the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. While their charters speak of development and stability, their loan conditions frequently involve structural adjustment programs, cutting subsidies, reducing wages, privatizing health and education. In effect, they become enforcers of a neoliberal order, reshaping entire economies under the banner of reform. Countries desperate for liquidity must surrender sovereignty, agreeing to policies that often benefit foreign investors more than local citizens. On the corporate side, power is not just held but wielded through networks. The top 50 corporations in the world, tech giants, banks, energy conglomerates, possess combined revenues greater than most nations. They fund political campaigns, write regulations, dictate labor standards, and shift supply chains with a keystroke. They form lobbying groups, attend elite forums like Davos, and engage in regulatory capture, where the watchdogs become the lapdogs. Private equity and hedge funds play a subtler but no less powerful role. Their investments can make or break companies, cities, or even entire sectors. They acquire distressed assets, gut pensions, lay off workers, and sell the remains, rebranding the process as efficiency. These financial entities don't build, they extract. Their success is measured not in products or services but in leverage and arbitrage. Tax havens add another layer. From the Cayman Islands to Luxembourg, trillions of dollars are parked offshore, untaxed, unaccountable, and shielded by secrecy. These jurisdictions allow the wealthy to hide wealth, avoid scrutiny, and starve public coffers. The result? States have less to spend on citizens, while elites face no consequences. Digital platforms further complicate the picture. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Meta don't just sell, they shape. They decide what we see, what we buy, and even what we believe. Their control over algorithms, data, and discourse makes them more than businesses. They are information gatekeepers, public squares, surveillance machines. They operate across borders, but obey no single set of rules. They influence elections, sway public opinion, and design addictive interfaces, all under the guise of user service. Meanwhile, international trade agreements entrench this power. These treaties, often negotiated in secret, grant corporations the ability to sue governments for passing environmental or labor laws that threaten profits. It's called Investor-State Dispute Settlement, ISDS, and it allows companies to bypass courts and demand compensation in private tribunals. The result? A chilling effect on public interest legislation. Energy companies sue over pipeline bans. Tobacco firms sue over health warnings. Mining conglomerates sue over land protections. This system doesn't just concentrate power, it punishes resistance. Even within democracies, elections are influenced by dark money, corporate lobbying, and media consolidation. The wealthiest donors shape platforms. Think tanks funded by billionaires frame debates. And news outlets owned by conglomerates shape what counts as truth. The lines between public and private blur. Government becomes governance by the wealthy. Labor is also reshaped. Outsourcing, gig work, and automation decouple employment from security. Workers compete in a race to the bottom, fewer benefits, lower wages, greater precarity. Meanwhile, the wealth generated by automation and efficiency is captured at the top, by shareholders, executives, and financiers. So who runs the global economy? Not a single person. Not a shadowy cabal. But a mosaic of institutions, networks, and actors whose interests align in maintaining the current system. They don't always conspire, but they converge. They don't need secrecy, because power disguised as freedom rarely gets questioned. To challenge this architecture, we must name it. Map it. Understand its levers. Only then can we imagine a new economy, one grounded not in control, but in cooperation. Not in secrecy, but in solidarity. Not in wealth, but in well-being. The story continues, with resistance, with reimagination, and with the people who refuse to accept that this is as good as it gets. We have pulled back the curtain on a system that sells itself as neutral, inevitable, and natural. But beneath that polished exterior lies a mechanism built to serve a select few. It is not a conspiracy, but it is coordinated. Not invisible, but expertly disguised. The global economy is not a tide lifting all boats. It is a current controlled by those who build the dams and dig the channels. And the myth that it operates on fairness, competition, and freedom only works if we remain passive, if we mistake the machinery for nature. The stories we're told, about free markets, trickle-down prosperity, and the invisible hand, are not just bad economics. They are tools of power. Tools to convince us that the world is as it must be. But the truth is, the world is made, and it can be remade. History shows that concentrated economic power always finds ways to protect itself, through legislation, ideology, suppression, or distraction. But history also shows that power can be challenged. That empires fall. That people rise. That systems, once seen as eternal, can be dismantled and replaced. Across the globe, that process has already begun. From climate justice movements to the fight for labor rights. From indigenous resistance to corporate extraction to the rise of economic democracy initiatives. The struggle is real. It is urgent. And it is growing. Alternative models of ownership, cooperatives, public banks, commons-based management, are gaining ground. Participatory budgeting and municipalism are bringing power back to communities. Debt cancellation campaigns are reclaiming financial sovereignty. And perhaps most importantly, people are beginning to believe again in the power of the collective. Because the greatest trick the current system ever pulled was convincing us that we are alone. That resistance is futile. That change is impossible. But we are not alone. And change is not only possible, it is already happening. To create a more just economy, we must start by telling the truth about where wealth comes from, who it serves, and what it costs. We must reject the idea that profit is more important than people, that corporations are more efficient than communities, or that the market knows best. We must reclaim the narrative. The economy is not an abstract machine. It is a set of relationships, shaped by policy, culture, and choice. We can choose dignity over domination, solidarity over competition, justice over growth. But this choice demands courage, the courage to imagine, to organize, and to act. It will not be easy. Those in power will resist. They will call reforms dangerous. They will say alternatives are unrealistic. They will use every tool at their disposal to protect the status quo. But the status quo is not safe. It is unstable. It is unjust. And it is unsustainable. We stand at a crossroads. One path leads deeper into inequality, ecological collapse, and authoritarianism disguised as efficiency. The other leads toward a more humane future, messy, uncertain, but rooted in care, cooperation, and democratic control. This is not just an economic choice. It is a moral one. Who do we want to be? A world ruled by markets, or a world governed by values? That is the final question this film asks, not just of governments or corporations, but of you. Because the power to change the system doesn't begin with wealth. It begins with awareness. And awareness leads to solidarity. And solidarity leads to transformation. So when someone asks, who really runs the global economy? You'll know the answer. And more importantly, you'll know that answer can change. Not with hope alone, but with history, humanity, and the unshakable will to build something better.